So hi again to the second slot of TCPM. At least I was a bit surprised by the way the first meeting is ended. I didn't know that there would be no warning. Nonetheless, I think as we still have some time left in the second part of today's meeting, we should be able to finish some of the discussions. However, we have another new issue now. We need a new note taker. Unfortunately, Neil is not able to take notes in the second slot. So we have pretty good meeting minutes for the first slot, but we need somebody who can finish the notes in the second slot. So can somebody please volunteer to do so? Okay, Wes is volunteering. Thanks, Wes. That's very, very useful. Okay, so I've sent a note to the list. We will shuffle the agenda. So we will have now two talks related to Yang. They fit together, so that's why I think it's good to have them back to back. And then we will come back to the MPTCP topic that we just run into the end of the meeting before, and then we will have, if time permits, the last talk on TCP/AO. But the first one is a talk from Kent, and this is actually a working group item in the NetConf working group. So I hope Kent is in the meeting. So,
hi, sorry about the delayed start. I was having difficulty joining. I'll just jump right into it. My name's Kent. I presented to this working group once before. This draft one is an earlier phase. Michael and I are co-authors on it. And currently it's queuing up for working group last call in the NetConf working group. And I'm presenting it here mostly as a heads up to this working group so that when we do the working group last call, it will be a dual working group last call, CCing TCPM, hoping to garner support and or at least see if there's any objections at that time. Next slide, please. This draft is actually part of a collection of drafts, 9 in total, and there's actually others that are being worked in other working groups for instance, PC, EP, syslog, and others. But these are the ones that the NetConf working group are working on. In the left-hand side, you can see the TCP-Client server draft, which is the one that this presentation regards, but just be mindful that it's just part of a larger set of drafts. Next slide, please. So each of these drafts defines a grouping that provides a snippet of configuration that can be mixed and matched as needed in order to create a protocol stack. If you look in the lower left-hand corner, you'll see an example HTTPS client stack. And starting at the bottom of that, you see the TCP client grouping, which is defined in the draft that this presentation is about. Above it is the TLS client grouping, which provides a snippet of configuration for TLS clients, primarily what is the TLS certificate, trust anchor certificate to use to authenticate the server with, and if TLS client certificate is required for authenticating yourself to the server, what is that? And then on top of that is HTTP client grouping, which for instance might be HTTP basic auth, authentication scheme. On the right-hand side is an example configuration. This is XML, but Yang models can be encoded in any, could be JSON or CBOR or something else. At the top, you see the snippet of TCP client configuration, and below that is TLS, and then below that is HTTP. Next slide, please. This draft actually defines a total of 3 Yang modules, and I want to start at the bottom. The 2 primary Yang modules are IETF TCP-Client and then an IETF TCP server. just a moment ago, we were looking at the IETF TCP client, and in particular, if you look inside that box, it says TCP client grouping. So that module defines a grouping, and actually only one grouping. Same with the TCP server draft. Module. It only defines one grouping. Both of those groupings use a grouping that's defined inside of a third module, the IETF TCP common Yang module. That grouping that they both use is called TCP connection grouping. And that connection grouping, the only thing it doesn't define anything except it uses the TCP common grouping. And then if you see a little call out on the right-hand side, the TCP common grouping, all it does is define keep alives. Now, the reason why the TCP common grouping exists and is separated from the TCP connection grouping is so as to allow for the TCP system level Yang module configuration, which in fact I think is the next presentation that Michael and Mahesh will be presenting after mine. Okay, so again, this draft defines 3 Yang modules, and that's what they are about. Next slide, please. Okay, I'm going to just dig into the client and server groupings. First, with the client. At the top, it defines basic parameters. Of course, a client needs to know what is the IP address or host name of the remote system it's connecting to, and maybe a port if it's not, there's not a default defined. Sometimes clients wish to bind to a local address or port number, but it's not required. That's what the little question mark means. It's not mandatory. And furthermore, it's defined by what's called a feature, which is that green part, local binding supported. So on an application or implementation by implementation basis, they can choose as to whether or not they wish to support the configuration of local binding for TCP client. Then after the basic parameters, there's a whole, like pretty much the largest block of the configuration is related to how to enable clients to connect through proxies. And here you see the configuration supporting 3 kinds of proxies: SOCKS 4, SOCKS 4A, and SOCKS 5. 4 and 4A are actually identical configuration, but they differ at the protocol level, so they need to be called out. In case the client is using one or the other, it needs to know which protocol it's supposed to be using. 5 is really similar to 4, but it introduces authentication as well. Here, the actual SOCKS 5 spec defines multiple authentication types. Here we only define the most common GSS API and username password. It is, in Yang terms, a choice, and other case statements can be augmented in by future efforts. So by no means is a finite list or the only authentication schemes that can ever be supported. And each of these authentication schemes are, again, constrained by a feature statement, so implementations can choose as to whether or not they support it all. And then at the very bottom, you see that the TCP client grouping uses the TCP connection grouping that I just discussed on the previous slide as really just being the keep alive configuration. Next slide, please. That was the previous slide. Next slide, please. There you go. Okay, so here's another example of TCP client, really much the same as the previous one, but now it's just the TCP client not having TLS or HTTP client snippets as well. And this configuration also shows the SOCKS 5 parameters being configured, as well as the keep alives. So it just kind of shows you how it all comes together, this snippet of configuration and that which it enables to be configured. Next slide, please. Now, looking at TCP server grouping, it's actually much simpler than the TCP client grouping. From a basic parameters perspective, the only thing to configure truly is what is the local address that the server should bind to, and optionally, what is the local port. And by the way, it says optional, but really what's happening here is the default is set to 0, which is an invalid value. And it thereby forces any implementing application to have to set the default to another value. So for instance, when the HTTP draft uses the TCP server grouping, it defaults to 443 or 80, and and then that's why it shows the local port as being optional here. But in practice, it's actually set to a value that's application specific. And then again, it has the same TCP connection grouping, which is the keep alive values. And since it's such a small snippet of configuration, I was able to fit the example at the bottom of the page as well. Here you see it all coming together and how a TCP server could be configured. Next slide. Actually, I don't know if there is a next slide. Oh, there we go. Yes, again, so we're about to enter a dual working group last call, and hopefully this is looks interesting to the work group and there's no objections, but are there any comments? I can't see if anybody's raising their hands, but chairs, anybody in the queue?
At the moment, I see nobody in the queue. I mean, I'm an author, so I have to be careful in what I'm saying here. But speaking as chair, if there are some comments on that document, please speak up. As you can see, there's probably going to be a working group last call on the TCPM list, specifically concerning the TCP-specific parts of this document, because clearly there were some TCP-specific parts in there. And I've also mentioned this on the list. It mentions the TCPM working group as, together with the NetConf working group, as the organization, I think, that publishes this Yang module. So definitely this working group has to review it.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, this is the second Yang-related talk in this session. In this case, I'm speaking as individual contributor. So my name is Michael Schorf, and I'm submitting this document together with Vishal and Mahesh. Mahesh is co-chairing the NetConf working group. And you've already seen there's the ongoing work on a TCP model that looks at TCP from the application perspective, from a TCP client and server perspective. This document looks at the TCP stack itself. And with that, I'd like to move to the next slide. We had in TCPM quite a bit of discussions what this implies. So this is not the first presentation on Yang. So I'd like to briefly recap the situation. As first of all, we have a TCP MIP that is widely implemented, in some cases directly as a MIP, in other cases in quite a number of operating systems, not as specified in the MIP, but with a very close modeling in specific formats. So the MIP is widely implemented. We do have other needs in other working groups. The one that we specifically have on the table is the TCP-AO configuration in IDR, which basically needs a Yang module for TCP-AO configuration, which is typically something that happens inside the TCP stack as part of other system settings for the TCP stack. And this obviously raises the question what to do in TCPM about that. There's been no clear consensus on that. So we got feedback ranging from, on the one hand side, that this is a painful and useless exercise on the one hand side, and on the other side, there was quite some support. Specifically, the more support was there, the more features we add to the model. We had some background talks with the chairs and specifically also with the ADs about what to do. And we came up with a new update in version 06 that basically proposes a very minimal base model as a sort of a compromise that on the one hand side meets the needs that we have on the table, but on the other side, that doesn't try to boil the ocean, because there have been concerns on that, and we've listened to that. So if you can move on the next slide, please. So version 06 of the model now includes a very short Yang module. Also the model is short because I can entirely put it on one slide. It basically contains 4 different parts. First, it contains 2 modeling features that are established by the TCP-MIP. It's a connection list and stats. The stats are basically a variant or modeled after the TCP-MIP with taking into account some feedback we got on the list, for example, on the length of the counters, which need to be updated. So that alone is a reason to think about the TCP-MIP, by the way. And then we have the part that is needed in the IDR model that is mostly TCP-AO configuration as needed in the stack. So you can see on this slide here some parameters for TCP-AO configuration. We also have the request to consider MD5, even if it's obsoleted. I've put some very explicit warning signs in the draft that MD5 is outdated and TCP-AO should be used instead. But of course, I mean, we can't change the running code that's out there. So that's, we have both in the document right now, but we have a clear recommendation in the document to focus on TCP-AO. And the last part is basically a reference to the Yang module that we have just discussed, the server and client configuration, which basically allows a user of this Yang module also to use the features in the other model. This is mostly keeper lives at the moment and the other parameters that are there. Keeper live configuration could be done as a system configuration. So it's possible that somebody would want to configure it here if he wants. And that's it, as we have removed everything else from the model. So as I said, we have 4 remaining parts left: statistics, a connection list. Both is basically something that's well known from the TCP-MIP. The Yang model is very similar to the TCP-MIP, so no news there. We have the part that is needed in IDR, the TCP-AO configuration and the MD5 configuration. And we have references to the other document basically to tie together the 2 Yang modules. And that's it. So it's a relatively short document, I think 15 pages. The Yang module, as you can see, is very short. That doesn't boil the ocean. And at least based on the feedback that I got so far, that is probably something that could address some of the concerns that were raised in the past. But of course, I'd like to open now the floor to feedback. As a specifically, I would like to ask the working group if there are any technical organization or whatever reasons not to work on such a small scope document that is already in a pretty good shape from the point of view of the author. So there's not a lot of work missing in finishing this document. So if you have concerns against working in that space, please speak up, because it's actually a very narrow focus document. So from the point of view of the authors, this is something that's doable and it addresses a lot of the concerns that have been raised in the past. But with that, I'd like to open the floor to comments or suggestions. And in this specific case, Yoshifumi has to manage the discussion, of course.
Okay. Martin.
First of all, thank you for your work to reduce the scope of this draft. I mean, I think, as you said, there was a definite concern about this turning into a giant time sink, and by shrinking it, you've helped do that. Can anyone who like objected to doing this work before maybe share with the group if they feel like the problems have been addressed? I personally, speaking as an individual, no objection to adopting this work. And I also, we talked with some of the ops ADs, and I think we agreed that this work should occur in this work group and not elsewhere. So Yeah. Well, what do the objectors think?
Does anybody have another comment? Okay, I think this draft has been presented previous interim, right? And then I think we also get some support in my understanding. And so one clarification question for this is completely independent from the previous draft. I mean,
Yes.
is that
No, not. There is a dependency at the moment from this document to the other one. But I mean, of course, this is an early document. The other one we've seen is close to working group last call. So there's no dependency in the reverse direction. So the netconf document does not depend on that one. Of course, as part of the working group discussions, we can look at that dependency. But as I said, the other document is not dependent on that one here.
Okay. Thanks for clarification. And any other comment? Okay, I think we can since this is not the first presentation, we have been presented several times. I think and then we have some supported comment. So I think it's okay to do ham. If there is any objection to do ham, please speak up.
Yeah,
if not,
yeah, Yoshifumi, do you want to have a formal ham or do you want to have just as a clarification? So,
what do you mean by clarification?
No, I'm asking. So, do you want to have a formal ham?
Yeah.
Or do you want because we have this experimental tool?
Yeah, I can try. I mean,
yeah, no. The reason I'm asking is if you try that, you should run a test run before.
Okay, I see. That's what you mean. Okay, then maybe I can try this run at first. Beforehand, if there is any objection to run ham, please speak up. If not, I would first try test for ham because this is first time. Okay, if not, okay, I will do some test. Oh, sorry, some. Did someone speak up right now? My screen has been changed.
Yoshifumi, there's someone in the queue.
Oh, okay. Right now. Oh, okay. Yes, I can do that. Yeah, somehow I cannot do that. Can you do that?
Okay.
So right now I already clicked the ham button. Then seems I don't have a control.
Okay. So I mean, you don't have the controls.
So he's trying to share his screen, which is one of the issues here. Kazuo, I think you need to offer video or audio rather than sharing your screen.
I see. Okay, maybe I can start testing ham. This is testing. So everybody seeing some screen.
Yeah, and I'd like to explain. As first of all, if you hum, you should go to the widget on the left. There should be a window that opens for humming. And I also have to record for the minutes that as a chair, I'm not allowed to hum, even though I'm presenting this as an individual contributor. So I will not hum here because I'm not allowed to do. It's it's the tab on the left-hand side. You have to click there, and I think you can either hum mildly or you can hum loudly.
Yes. So if it's okay, if test seems to be okay, there is no question.
Yeah, Yoshifumi, do you see the result? Do you see?
Yeah.
Okay.
I got piano.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay, okay, Bob asking a question. Okay, oh, and then there are several questions. Bob cannot go. Bob, if you want to speak up.
Hello?
Bob? Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. I'm just trying, I don't understand. What were we testing? Because I couldn't use the hum tool. I don't know whether that was intended, that was meant to, or we just think that it's like.
Yeah, I just would like to check you are ready for this tool, to use this. If there is any questions, any problem, let me know.
Yeah, Bob, this was a guidance we got as chairs. We are supposed to test the hum tool before we actually hum with it. So this was guidance that we got as chairs.
Jana?
Yeah, I just looking at the chat screen, I think people are still quite confused about what to do. So your test, I think, was excellent in that it proved that people still need some help to this. You might want to make sure that people can actually hum before asking for it again.
Okay, maybe
I
we
guess
need
I can't really tell you people. You can't ask people whether they get it, but is there a way to list a question there? I don't. It just says hum results, but I guess the question is spoken, and it doesn't show up on the screen. Is that correct?
I just showed. Yeah.
That's my understanding.
Okay.
Right.
So I think you have to be very crisp about this. I think the main thing is that you have to basically say the question and say the hum starts now, because the hum is only for 25 seconds or 30 seconds. And if people are trying to locate where the hum is, then it simply doesn't work.
Yeah, right.
But yeah, I think it's useful at least.
Okay. So I think, okay, we are running out of time. So I think we can move on to the official hum. So test is okay. And then, so this time I will make sure this is working group adoption for the draft hum. Okay. If there is no comments, question, I will do it. So now I would like to do official hum. So please be careful, and then there is only 35 seconds for you to make a hum. Okay. There are some questions.
Yeah, you should do 2 hums, for and against it.
Yes, I will do that. Okay. So the first hum is if you support adopt to this draft, please make a hum within 35 seconds. Now I will start hum. Okay. The hum result is piano. Okay, I will now do a next hum. If you disagree to adopt this draft in TCPM, please make hum. I will give you 35 seconds. So hum result is actually pianissimo. So it's stronger than previous one.
No, That's the opposite.
Oh, sorry, opposite. Peer
weaker.
interface. Sorry.
I would read it. I mean, I'm sort of in a complex situation because I'm author, but I would read it in that case that the feedback is weaker, but probably somebody has humped against it. So this is probably how to read that.
Right. I think this feedback is still weak, so I cannot make any, decision. Probably I will go back to the offline and then discuss sometimes with other chairs and to make final decision.
Okay, as I would argue that we, given also the downsides of the tool, we move on. Also to have the other two presentations that we're missing.
AO vector.
So Yoshifumi, if you're speaking, we are not hearing you.
I think I spoke it. I think we need some time to make a final decision. That's my final comment, my take on this one. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, and then so I think we are running out of time. So I think this session has been done. So I think I need to move to another presentation.
Yes, I agree. Let's move on. Let's take that to the list. There was also a comment in the chat from Martin that those who are apparently against objection, it would help if they could post to the mailing list what the objection is. So I would propose to finish the session as we come back now to the multipass TCP talk, the second one, or maybe just a summary of the discussion that we had on the first one.
Michael, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, so at least for me, because I'm not very experienced in getting drafts adopted, so it's my first time. So it would be interesting now for me to understand what has to be fulfilled from our side to get adopted.
Okay, I'm not sure if Shifumi can comment on it because he's more familiar with this. If he's not speaking, I will give some comment. One of the observations is we don't have the multipass TCP implementers community in today's meeting. And this makes it pretty hard for us to make any call on that because the implementation feedback matters a lot. I've already given you one feedback. So I think IPR is something that you need to sort out, at least that's my personal view. And other than that, what typically helps a lot in TCPM is implementations beyond prototypes. It's not required, but it helps a lot. And for the demos that you've presented, for example, it was not clear if this is a prototype or if this is a commercial or pre-commercial product. It's the latter that helps a lot in TCPM.
Okay, got it. So probably it will help to have another round in the mailing list to get the MPTCP people on board, right?
Yes,
I think that, yeah, I support this one. Yeah.
Okay. Thanks.
Yep.
Okay, so Yoshifumi, can you change the slide deck?
Yeah. Which one?
To the other MPTCP one, the one on the data scheduling.
Okay.
So my proposal is we will have 7 or 8 minutes on this one, and then 7 or 8 minutes on the last talk, so that we can indeed have all presentations. So hi, Chiao, we cannot hear you if you speak. Oh, you don't. Hi, Chiao, can you say something, please?
Server is used in MPTCP protocol. Okay, go to next slide. This page shows the typical use cases for this function. As we all know, MPTCP can use multiple subflows for transmission during one session. As shown in the picture, you can see the client have two network interfaces that are identified by IP1 and IP2. And on the server, there are two existing network interface indicated by IP3 and IP4. When server 2 detect that the KPI for IP3 is better than that of IP4, he wanted to develop the traffic from IP4 to IP3. So the server can use this function to inform client to do the traffic switching. And another case that is during a session, a new network interface that is IP5 was added. For server, he wanted to move some traffic, move part of the traffic to IP5 for test. They want to provide is a VIP user with better experience. So he will want to switch the traffic to switch their traffic to a network interface with better KPI. I think this is the typical use case for this function. From this case, we have concluded two basic flows for this function. First is server request client to perform traffic switching. That means server setting address ID for target network interface and shown in the above picture. We will send a request to client and tell him the target network interface by the address ID. And the client to receive the request, he will select one subflow connected to the target network interface for data switching. Another basic flow is that the server decided to cancel this navigation. He will send a request to client to cancel previous navigations. Okay, go to next slide. To support this function, we think we should define a new option. We named it MP navigation. This is a structure for this option. A new subtype should be allocated to indicate this new option, and address ID should be be used to indicate the target network interface. We use the flag R to distinguish the two basic flows. When the value equals 0, it indicates the server request client to perform traffic switching, and the value equals 1 as the server request to cancel previous navigation setting. We also defined 3 other flags. Flag E, we think is used to provide reliability for this option. That's just like that in add adjust option. Flag B indicate whether the subflow over which the option is received is the backup one. And we also define a flag R for future, reserved for future usage. In fact, we are still thinking whether which 3 flags are necessary and mandatory. TCP, that's all our design for this function. We think it's useful and practical. In fact, we have received many suggestions from the mail list, from Yush, from Chris, and from Professor Olivia. Thanks a lot. For next step, I will incorporate the suggestions to our new version of this draft. That's all for this presentation. Thanks.
Any oh. So yeah, my personal comment is, yeah, I think, we already discussed, Olivier and Christophe made a similar comment, but I think MP Purio is too simple. But we don't know, what's the best way to, add new features. So if you have very good use case, very tangible and concrete use cases, that would be very beneficial for us to think about, okay, this proposal is the best, idea to address the use case. And so if you could, come up with, very tangible use case, that would be very good.
Okay, yeah, I will. I think, in fact, I have give our opinion on this question, and if need, I will give more use case for it to support it. Yeah, thanks.
Okay. Yeah, we can continue discussion on the mailing list. Thanks so much.
Yeah, and with that, I think we have about 7 minutes left for the last talk from you, Hamati, on TCP/IP test vectors.
Hello all. Thanks for having us still here. I will talk about the TCP/IP test vectors. Background is that I tried to find test vectors for the TCP/IP and there weren't any while I was implementing. So during the email discussions, it was noticed that maybe a draft could be something that helps here. After all, the TCP/IP is 10 years old and it seems that there aren't that many implementations out there either. So the next slide, please. So here we provide the test vectors to actually validate the implementation. So we have all the keys that are needed and based on the RFC. And then we also have test TCP headers and packets. and also the max available for the developer to check if they are valid, if they have valid implementation. And something is still pending, so the IPv6 is still missing, and NAT travels are variant also, but that's not even included in the original RFC. So probably the IPv6 part is something that we need to add later on. Next slide, please. So during the implementation I did, this draft tries to gather those things that were problematic, and we discussed with Joe and otherwise, and they are the algorithm itself, how the MAC is calculated, the parameters that are given for the k-derivation function, and also the string handling, and the header coverage. So that it refers to the actual packet, and it's a bit different in the TCP/AO than the MD5 version, how the header is included. And also while implementing, there was a problem noticed in the sequence number extension calculation. A proper algorithm is now sent to the email list, and the intention is to do a separate draft about that. Next slide, please. So I guess the ways forward is that we need to check that this is really a correct implementation. I've been working with one fuzzing vendor to validate it, but after receiving the draft, they replied that they have a problem. So I guess at least it's useful to have the draft, which is good. So probably this would be good as informational, and if working group sees that they want to adapt this is of course fine, but any comments are welcome. Thanks.
So this is Michael speaking. Are there any comments or questions on that work? And maybe I'll have a question. So it's probably correct that there are not too many TCP/AO implementations, but there have been some implementations efforts recently in router vendors. So I wonder, is there a way to test whether the test vectors apply to other implementations?
Well, I guess the option there is to actually have the equipment and the software, but that's pretty heavy. So it would be good to have the feedback for this draft. That's one way. And of course, the hackathons are another way where we can check what might be the differences between the implementations. I know that there has been some activity on the hackathons for the TCP/AO, but that's about it. I think none has been there yet.
Yeah, because for this work, of course, it would help a lot if we can at least confirm that another implementation, as it confirms basically that the document is correct. And
yeah, that's true. That we need, and that's one reason why I'm working with the fuzzing vendor to actually get at least one implementation that matches. But of course, I hope that they are correct, and I try to do my best. So let's hope that's the case.
we have, Yoshifumi, you have somebody in the queue. I'm not sure if you want to.
Not seeing any people in the queue.
I see somebody.
Okay, this is Tero Kivinen. So I have been doing some TCP authentication option work in the hackathons. I did some TCP dump, checking the if you have TCP, this kind of packet dump, it actually verifies the TCP options. Oh.
Okay, sounds good. I guess that is something that we could test then.
Yeah. So that's actually so. And I was trying to get more people to work on the TCP in hackathons, but there has been nobody coming there, so that has been mostly alone there. But yes, it would be very useful to have a hackathon having that kind of things.
Thanks.
Yeah, and I guess, I mean, we will run out of time, but I think, at least my point of view, both as chairs and individual contributors, that this could end up in something very useful. Of course, it needs more work, but if you find others to work on this, that I think this could be something that's really useful. So at least from my point of view, I encourage you to further work on this. We typically don't adopt 0.0 versions in TCPM. So it typically takes some time until documents get more mature. But as I said, if you find others, if you can confirm that the test vectors are okay, at least from my point of view, this is very useful work.
Okay, thanks for the feedback.
Okay, and with that, we are through the agenda. So I guess we will get logged out in 4 minutes or 3 minutes. I'd like to thank all presenters for this experiment. I think all of us learned a bit more about Meet Echo. Nonetheless, I hope it was okay. We will definitely have to think about the humming. That is something that probably needs further thinking. But I'd like to thank all presenters and all speakers for contributing to this TCPM session. We don't have the blue sheets this time. This is done automatically, but I'd like to thank again. And I hope that we can see again soon, either face-to-face or maybe in another online edition of the IETF. So thanks a lot and stay safe. Thanks.